I think that we're living through probably the most exciting time in education. We're just going to see so much happening in the space, both of XR, AI in particular. The future is going to be 3D, it's going to be spatial, it's going to be digital, and Unity is powering all of that. The big question is kind of what should we be teaching now? What can humans do better than AI? Education touches everyone, not from, we all need to learn, and we need to learn more than ever, based on how quickly jobs are changing, how quickly society's changing. There's never been a time, I think, where lifelong learning or, on-demand learning has ever been more important. I do really think this one is, we're living, in the growth phase of this technology. Very optimistic about it.
This is The Media Machine, where media, business, and innovation intersect. Hi, I'm Johanna Salazar, and I'll be your host as we examine the future of content, technology, and entertainment through the lens of 4 key pillars: process, profit, people, and planet. Hello, Media Machine listeners and viewers. In today's episode, I'm joined by Alex Grady, former Senior Product Manager at Unity, and now a Senior Manager in Learning Experience Design with CodePath. For those unfamiliar with Unity is the world's leading platform for content creators looking to build, run, and grow immersive, real-time 2D and 3D content. Recognized as the #1 most innovative company in augmented and virtual reality by Fast Company, Unity continues to shape the future of digital experiences. Before we dive into this incredible episode with Alex, I want to give you a quick update. We recorded this episode before Alex left Unity and wanted to let you know since we heavily discussed Alex's work at Unity. Alex, welcome to The Media Machine. Alex, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. For those people that have never heard of Unity, tell us a little bit more about Unity.
Unity powers over 70% of AR experiences, but we didn't start in AR and VR. Unity is the software behind beginning with game development. It's a tool that brings to life mobile games for across multiple platforms, indie games, big studio games, and that same technology used in games has now proliferated across various industries, and obviously with exciting new platforms to display this 3D or 2D digital technology on. There's just more and more applications for it every day. So we're quickly growing. There's amazing things happening from creators, and it's a fantastic platform to get started on if you're interested in creating these kind of experiences.
Very cool. What motivated you to embrace emerging technologies and their use in education? Because that's pretty much your area, right, at Unity?
Yeah, exactly. So I don't come from a technologist background. I was a classroom educator who taught, amongst other things, IT, some technology in middle school, and then moved into professional development and EdTech. So got excited as a classroom teacher about technology and the affordances of new technologies for teaching, and then moved into EdTech, so more sort of platforms for teaching, and then had a passion for, both games, but more importantly, XR. I'm sure we'll talk about that in a bit more detail, but augmented reality, virtual reality, and just what those technologies are bringing to education. I'm kind of a firm believer, although I haven't got a time machine, but I think that we're living through probably the most exciting time in education in hundreds of years since the printing press. I think in the coming decades, we're just going to see so much happening in the space, both of XR, AI in particular. That's why I found myself wanting to learn these tools and technologies, join any interest group I could, and look at companies that were doing interesting things. And in my opinion, Unity is the most, is the heart of it all. The future is going to be 3D, it's going to be spatial, it's going to be digital, and Unity is powering all of that. So that was my journey, wanting to come and work here. And now I work on the education team, like you say, supporting both, the implementation of these tools in educational settings, both creators who are making educational content, but most of my time is spent on supporting future learners or future creators to take on to learn these tools.
I love that. So you mentioned spatial. What is spatial? And also, I know you guys talk about polyspatial technologies. Tell us a little bit more about what is that for our listeners who don't know.
Yeah. So spatial computing is kind of the next wave of computing. We had desktop computers, it was kind of phase one. And then we had mobile computing, which was a huge development in computing. And now we're moving into this phase of spatial computing, which essentially is overlaying digital objects in our space. So the future, in the next decade, we're going to see the internet be around us, essentially, is a easy way to think about it. Some of these technologies at the moment are, augmented reality, which I just talked about, having digital objects around us. Some examples of that are Pokemon Go, I guess, for gaming, has been a really amazing use case for augmented reality. Things like IKEA have the app where you can place furniture around your house, try clothes on. There's a lot of tools now for trying clothes on or seeing what makeup looks like on your face before you buy it. Virtual reality is another form of more immersive spatial computing, whereby you're fully immersed in a new world, whether that's for gaming, whether that's for educational experiences, field trips. You can't see any of the real world. And then there's a really interesting kind of mixed reality as well, which is when kind of the digital world interacts with the real world. So you can throw a ball and in the headset or whatever you're wearing, and it would interact specifically with like tables and chairs in your space digitally. So it's a lot of really exciting changes happening in the future of computing. Polyspatial is a technology that Unity has been working on in collaboration with Apple that is really exciting because it enables different experiences to be in the same space. So previously, opening an app, you would see, one app at a time. You're playing a game in VR, or you're doing the IKEA experience. You're doing one thing at a time. Polyspatial enables both kind of window-based 2D, 2D kind of experiences, as well as volume experiences. So you could have a kind of a game happening over here, or the Clash of Clans experience, battling someone over here, but I have to do work and I'm in my Zoom call over here and keep one eye out over there, and I've got wars happening. Eventually, it's going to be pretty normal seeing people wearing headsets either in a work setting, on an aeroplane, on the bus on the way to work, just like I guess AirPods were when you first saw people speaking on the street to people.
I love this stuff. It's almost like the evolution of social media. How nobody understood it at first, and then now it's like an integral part of every business, professional life, and the internet. It's just the evolution of computing. I love it. So with that said, how have you seen XR deployed in the classroom?
I've definitely seen kind of all ends of the spectrum, from just throw the tech at teachers and, hope that it works, to like really effective teaching and learning with these tools and technologies. The most effective things that I see are when schools, educators, departments really understand the affordances, like what is specifically extended reality, spatial computing, virtual reality do better than anything else can, or why does it better than showing a video or actually being in a lab or whatever the other kind of activity is that students are going to be doing. Jeremy Bailenson is a phenomenal researcher at Stanford University. Highly recommend his book, which I think was released in 2019. Can't remember it offhand, but he in there has an acronym, RIDE, RIDE, which speaks to the best uses for the technology, which are experiences that are rare, experiences that are impossible, dangerous, or expensive. So thinking about that, and educators going, well, I'm going to be teaching this particular subject. What are some of the things that students wouldn't be able to do? Like think outside the box. If we're doing, earth sciences, can we go and go under the earth near the core? Can we go into outer space? Can we make really small things big? Can we shrink people down and go magic school bus style inside the body? Dangerous things, obviously, see a lot of amazing, particularly post-secondary institutions, departments like engineering, manufacturing, training, medical, I talked about before, schools that are really embracing the technology because you can do things that are dangerous and you with low risk, and you can do them over and over and over again until the muscle memory is built up. And then you have to do them in a real setting. That's a huge advantage. What else have I got in the acronym? Expensive, obviously. Breaking things, going on trips to the top of Mount Everest, things that you just can't do. That's the most exciting stuff. And people who understand those affordances and have learning outcomes that match to those and aren't just jamming the technology in because it'd be fun and it's a shiny toy, I think that's where we see the most impact.
Is Unity being used a lot in the classroom right now? Outside of the programs that you guys have implemented, or it's primarily just in the programs that you guys have implemented?
There's a lot of educators using Unity in the classroom, growing more and more. Most importantly, that there's a lot of jobs in this space. There are a lot of opportunities for students that are going into creating games, creating experiences for, automotive manufacturing, for medical applications, for educational. So the more jobs there are, the more schools are investing money in it, investing in educator training and hiring people with knowledge. And the exciting thing in my job is seeing the ways in which it's used, and the kind of the interesting and very inventive ways that schools are using it. University of Sydney, for example, has a medical school, and they actually get students to learn Unity and be able to show their learning of anatomy inside a virtual experience. There's schools in high schools that I've seen where computer science department or educators in the computer science team work with other departments to have students, creating, for example, a poetry unit where they would bring their poetry to life and create, when they're in the computer science lesson, they're building on what they created and bringing some of that imagery. I think as the tools get easier and as there's less requirements for programming knowledge to create these experiences, and just easier onboarding, which is, we're going to see in the next couple of years, it's going to be really exciting.
Very cool. How will new technologies like XR and Gen AI change how we educate students?
The big question is kind of what should we be teaching now? What can humans do better than AI? Particularly, I'm talking here about generative AI, not necessarily XR, but we now have this new tool that will be a co-pilot or be a guide, a personal...
like each kid can have their own personal assistant.
Incredible.
Something like that.
Personalization, it's been a thing in education for a long time. And, how we surface things for students, what they could learn next based on, what they're achieving now and what supports they need. That's been around for a while, but there's nothing as specific and powerful as what we see with generative AI tools now. So I think it's really exciting for educators. I think their role changes. Back in the classroom, I would have much preferred to not spend as much time kind of standing at the front talking. I think being the guide on the side and being someone who's there doing the human things, helping students collaborate, having those amazing moments in teaching that aren't standing at the front, didactic style, just speaking to students
like
and telling them what to learn.
One for all.
Exactly.
Instead, now you can customize to each individual student and based on the student's learning journey or learning preferences.
100%. The kind of the XR and AI pairing, I think, is going to be really interesting. We've talked about it before, but things like accessibility, for people who have special learning needs, I think this is a game changer. A lot of people could, attest to this. Don't find the classroom a great place to learn, get distracted easily, don't, could go further or need that extra support. And for educators, that's the most stressful part of the job, is knowing at the end of the day, going home and being like, I wish I could have done X for this student or X for that student, but I just don't have the capacity because I can't differentiate, like all the time. It's just the hardest part of the job of educators is feeling like you can always do more and there's always something to do. And I just think now that's like the tables are turning.
Correct me if I'm wrong. You probably know this. So apparently 10% of what you read, you retain. 30% of what you see, you retain. But 90% of what you experience, you retain. And that is what really attracted me to these technologies and learning. We know that every child learns differently, but if we get every single child to be immersed in whatever the learning experience is, whatever the lesson is, we know that child and those children are going to retain at least 90% because they're fully immersed in whatever they're learning. And I thought that was so fascinating. Video game engines have been integrating AI for many years now. How will Gen AI impact the gaming industry, and how will this impact the learning experience inside and outside the classroom?
AI has been a huge part of gaming. For example, non-player characters, NPCs, how do they move around the space? How do they interact with the player? The advancements in generative AI are going to be massive for particularly developers and creators. In a lot of other industries, that is really tricky, time-consuming, very technical for highly advanced, specific creators and with the specific tool sets. And so, in a big studio, that's not really an issue, where you have all of those employees that can do those really advanced things. But the money to do those things. But now for the indie creator or the solo creator or someone who just has an idea and wants to bring something to life, the kind of tools that we're seeing come through and the things that Unity is working on are going to touch every part of the development process and also the runtime process. So when the application is running, I'm incredibly excited about that, because my job, essentially, the big goal with my job has always been to make it easier for students to onboard to Unity. And there is a steep learning curve for tools like Unity and other professional tools used in the industry. So from that side of things, I'm really excited to have students and anyone be able to create with a lot more ease. Specifically for education.
The pandemic, we know, disrupted every industry on the planet, especially education. Unity partnered with Meta in 2022 and invested in EdTech. What are some of the results in the partnership?
Yeah, that was like one of the most exciting projects I've been a part of. We were able to partner with them and give away 5,000 headsets last year, and impacting lower socioeconomic schools and districts in particular we were targeting. And as part of that partnership as well, we ran training for over 3,000 registrants on developing for software, so developing for Unity for the Quest headset. So that was something that we're really keen to support schools to do, as well as being able to use the headsets for immersive learning experiences. We now have this big cohort of new schools from last year that are in the new media classes that are using Unity software and have the quests in the classroom and have students going through this curriculum. It's a way for students to quickly be able to, use the technology and then put a headset on and see that they've created a world very easily. And it's only getting easier. As part of that partnership, we also gave large grants to post-secondary institutions that were creating either pathways for creation with XR or were themselves creating kind of educational XR experiences. So, yeah, we impacted over 10,000 students, learners last year. That was just year one. And now that we have those educators with the hardware as well as the knowledge and the understanding of teaching these tools, I'm really excited for how many more students are going to get access to that in the coming years. And so, more to come on that.
Why is it so important that large companies like Apple, Meta, Unity, just to name a few, are investing in EdTech?
I think for all the reasons that we've previously talked about in terms of the social impact aspect of this technology on the education industry and EdTech. But I think they realistically see the financial opportunity as well. EdTech is a huge market, whether that's learning experience platforms, Meta in particular, investing a lot of social impact money into the support for making accessible and that digital divide space. I think they understand the challenges with creating these amazing new technologies and that it should be provided for all. So I'm really grateful that they're thinking about that. I think education is this huge use case. Education touches everyone, not from, we all need to learn and we need to learn more than ever, based on how quickly jobs are changing, how quickly society's changing. There's never been a time, I think, where lifelong learning or, on-demand learning has ever been more important. And I think these companies recognize that, and they recognize that from, young ages, from high school all the way up till seniors, that these tools are going to be important throughout people's lives.
In 2020, you said you were optimistic about the potential of XR to address issues in education and make learning more meaningful, motivating, and equitable, as well as inclusive. Do you remain optimistic today?
I do. Yeah, I really do. Although I think back then I probably had slightly rose-tinted glasses, having just come out of,
did. But that's the beauty of it. That's why you're still in this space. We need to be that way.
Yeah, 100%. I think I've only lived through one phase of the hype cycle of immersive technologies because, there's been decades of work on it, and it's gone through these different waves of people getting excited about new breakthroughs. I do really think this one is we're living, in the growth phase of this technology. Very optimistic about it. I think more optimistic actually this year with the proliferation of AI than I have been previously. We're seeing a lot of new tools, and Unity's making specific investment in making creation easier. So that's always been the hard part, is the content. Because we know that immersive technologies work really well in educational settings. They're for hands-on learning, for example. Like I talked about the accessibility, if people from around the world might be able to do things they hadn't previously. You can collaborate in shared spaces. We heard a lot about the metaverse in the last couple of years, but whether it's called the metaverse or something different, there are now places where you can collaborate with people from around the world. The fidelity of doing that is going to improve. It'll feel like we're in the same room as others. Motivating in the sense of I can understand why I'm learning these concepts. There's real world applications for the things that I'm learning. And I know that because I'm actually doing them. If it's a high school student who's having to learn, algebra, exponential functions, I can go into a pandemic-like experience and see the implications of like these things happening in the real world. Use cases where you would use the math for surgeons being able to practice things that are incredibly dangerous than you would want to do straight away, manufacturing, all those sorts of things. I still have some worry, well, a lot of worry, I'm sure a lot of people do, about the kind of equity around this technology and the digital divide. I think that's something slightly worrying we saw during COVID, is kind of the increased digital divide. Tools are getting cheaper, and just like the mobile phone, the first few years of mobile phones, it wasn't accessible to everyone. But I think it will become, hopefully, just like mobile has now, able for anyone in the world, no matter the economic kind of circumstances, to get access to some of this technology. Yeah, I think the optimism definitely for me outweighs the concerns, although I think really importantly, hoping, and I don't, have a seat at the table, but people that are thinking intentionally about things like accessibility, about bias, who is making the tools and technology, and who are they making it for? Mm-hmm. And are they building for the edges and supporting, everyone to be able to access this stuff and feel like they are recognized and represented in what's being made? The key concern is, I guess, being with any new technology is kind of focusing on the technology more as opposed to how's it changing the pedagogy. Mm-hmm. Technology doesn't replace a great teacher. I think it can enhance lessons, but really takes an understanding of what are the learning goals, what are the outcomes that we're aiming for, and do these tools and technologies actually bring value to that? Do they enhance what we're trying to do already? I think we've seen a lot of cases in which a lot of investment goes into district-wide, we're going to give everyone an iPad, and then things just give it a year and things are becoming dusty, or educators that just haven't had the training or don't see the use in it just aren't using them. And, it's not something you can force feed into schools, workplace learning, any of that sort of stuff. It really takes a great understanding of, the pedagogy, the science of learning.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I know that firsthand because I've been bringing technologies into the classroom for a long time, especially VR. How do we ensure equity and equality in the field of gaming and XR, especially now that learning is becoming more and more immersive and gamified?
I think, really importantly, intentional design. As far as on the creation side of it, as far as equality, whose voices are being heard, who's creating the content, who's it being created for, having those kind of mindsets in the design phase and the creation of both the hardware, the software, the experience, I think is really important. As far as equity is concerned, it's really around investment. I think providing investment for underrepresented learners, for countries that wouldn't have the supports, the time, the investment in educator training and upskilling. That's, I think, hugely important, and I hope continues.
Your job at Unity is very much hands-on, and you can impact those things, I think. Is that when you're sitting at the table and you're all talking about, what you're bringing into the classroom, how things are going to be brought into the classroom, how do you handle these things? And I'm assuming you have a hand in this. Do you?
Yeah. Well, I'm particularly fortunate because Unity's education team sits under the broader social impact unit of the business. So our goals are all trickle up to all about social impact. So underrepresented learners, future creators, and who they are and who's not being represented. So a lot of our energy goes into meeting those goals, and a lot of the work is all about that. We care about it greatly. I feel really privileged to work with a lot of people that care deeply about this stuff, either who have been in the industry already, myself coming from an educational background, not having touched the gaming industry, or, large tech companies, where people understand that getting people from the Ivy League colleges and the reliance on people who can afford to get there, programs, spending a lot of money on programs for people that don't have those opportunities is, I think, really important. And everyone across Unity contributes to that.
I love that. I know that when you and I spoke in the past, I think you mentioned something about the environment. How is Unity addressing some of the environmental concerns that come from building these technologies?
Being part of the social impact team, I get to have some insight into, and, really excited both for the talent that we have on that side, on ESG reporting, on the particularly internal initiatives that are going on in thinking about how we're sustainable, and also supporting other companies and creators that we support to be sustainable. I think the technology that we power is going to have huge implications for, tackling particularly the climate crisis. I think there's so much to be said about the impact that not having to commute and, for leadership to fly all over the world to kind of meet with each other and corporations to lower their footprint. I think that's going to get better and better. I think, Zoom is still a real challenge. And, I know how I feel at kind of 4 p.m. each day after a whole day of Zooms. When XR becomes more prevalent, when those tools are used more and more, I think that's going to be really improve those sort of outcomes. Less reliance on commuting, going to offices, travel around the world. I think through the use of these tools and AI, in terms of manufacturing is a huge one. Being able to, solve problems digitally and, create digital twins of things so that before you build big buildings or you do create big manufacturing processes, that you're able to kind of see ways to optimize to lower costs, but also to lower footprint and be, as light on the earth as possible. I think that's another reason why, it's particularly exciting working at Unity and working in the social impact team.
So now I want to focus a little bit more on future job markets, because you've touched on this a little bit throughout your answers. In the past, we've seen tech shifts happen every few decades, then every few years, and now it's happening every week. How do you see society evolving in the next 10 years with these massive technological advances and through a Unity lens?
I think there's going to be a lot of kind of upheaval in certain industries, a lot of disruption, a lot of displacement of jobs, which we saw in the past in different industrial revolutions, as people had to change what they were doing, as society got more kind of industrial, folks moved into the cities. There's been huge kind of shifts like this in the past, and I think this is kind of another one that's going to happen. I think a really interesting analogy I heard the other day from a colleague at Unity was that particularly with creation tools, if you looked at the start of the 20th century and you saw the emergence of the camera, for example, there were a lot of people who relied on portrait painting and painting real life images, and their living basically was for doing that. And fantastic artists, that's how they earned their living. But then with the rise of the cameras, you saw like impressionism, and you saw this incredible change in the way people interpreted creating art, doing things that cameras couldn't do. And I think as far as the Unity lens, in terms of what we see creators being able to do now that AI will be able to take some of those more menial tasks and some of those things that take a long time. Some of the creativity, I imagine, the stuff that we're going to see is going to be just astounding from folk who maybe didn't have the technical abilities in certain areas, but understand what they want, and they have ideas and some of those kind of more executive functions, and acting like the studio head, who's like, I need this and I need that, and being that, as opposed to being the art department, will now just be you giving that task to AI powered tools. I think that's really exciting, and the kind of similar thing I think will happen across industries where people will adapt and change, and the roles will look different, and yeah, I think the most successful people will embrace that and understand the new possibilities, and kind of not be resistant to change.
So definitely we'll see a lot of jobs lost, but we'll also see a lot of new jobs being created. So 85% of the jobs created by 2030 have not been invented yet. So, with everything you've been saying, what do you think the future workforce and workforce training looks like?
I think as far as learning, traditional methods of, going and doing a 2-year or a 4-year course are going to be less and less relevant to the workforce. And I think just-in-time learning, I think chunked, like small bite-sized learning, is going to be incredibly important. You obviously see that more with alternative credentials coming in, the importance of micro-badging, things like that are becoming more and more prevalent. It's really interesting tracking with XR in particular. Like, we obviously keep an eye on the jobs that use Unity and XR jobs, but just, when we talk about those 85% of jobs, going on and seeing AI positions on, say, a LinkedIn or elsewhere, that explosion of now positions of people who are prompt engineers or folks that are doing generative AI integrations with existing software. Wherever the opportunity is, I think people who are opportunistic and go, I'm curious about this technology and software and learning, and hopefully companies and in workplace particularly, managers and leadership understand that, they need to provide that for people more and more now, because, to succeed, you're going to have to keep up with the pace of new tools and tech.
So how do you think we can equip young people and people without college degrees with the skills necessary for future jobs?
I think really importantly, we're seeing big companies remove requirements or change requirements for what is expected for some of those entry-level roles, really importantly, and not requiring that university degree. Companies like Google, who are investing a lot of money to bring those kind of boot camps, certificate courses for free or really low cost, and having scholarships and things like that. Software is a big part of that. A lot of job pages are looking for folks that understand, Data Studio or have particular pieces of software. I think it's astounding opportunity for especially companies that own that software and can push that software. Like us at Unity, we're investing a lot in bringing certification, short courses to learners, like you're saying, who don't have the privilege of going to universities and want to break into some of these lucrative industries or really high growth industries. I think that's really important and a great opportunity, obviously, with the costs of traditional education skyrocketing and becoming unaffordable, and people not wanting to be left with, loans their whole life paying off. That companies should recognize that if they want to prepare students to use their tools and software and programs. So I think there's a really great opportunity there. I think also for universities and colleges, like partnering with industry and with these companies to provide short courses. And, in person, there's still so much value in being there in person, collaborating with others, being inspired in groups and that group kind of learning. Some of the stuff that you can't currently do on, like a online learning course. So colleges that recognize that and can bring lower cost, affordable, short courses that are really like boosting learners into entry-level positions. I think that's a really important aspect as well.
I think that you guys are doing an incredible job at Unity at creating these certification programs that could be good for anybody. So anybody can go in and use Unity tools and the software and then see what they can do with those technologies. And I think that you guys are doing a huge part at helping to train or providing tools that will help train the workforce of the future. I think that's incredible. Anyways, Alex, thank you so much. Have an awesome weekend. We'll be talking soon. And yeah, thanks again for doing this. Take care.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to our show. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. You can follow us at The Media Machine Podcast on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. The Media Machine is hosted by Johanna Salazar. Our producers are Mia Vinciguerra and Johanna Salazar. This episode was edited by Andres Cote. This episode features music from Envato Elements. Thanks for listening.